Coming up on this Tuesday edition of Newsline at noon, a 20-day parliamentary audit on the largest number of government offices begins, but rival parties are not thought to be fully prepared given their protracted wrangling over April's ferry disaster. Samsung Electronics profits plunge 60% in the third quarter as its troubled smartphone unit drags the Korean tech giant's performance to a 3-year low. Plus, the first Ebola infection outside of Africa. A Spanish nursing assistant contracts the deadly virus after helping treating an infected priest. These stories and more on Newsline at noon. It's noon Tuesday, October 7th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Eoh Jin-joo.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broome. We start at the National Assembly in Seoul, where an annual parliamentary audit of the government kicked off earlier on this Tuesday.
Over the next 20 days, lawmakers will question officials from a record 672 government offices and agencies. But as our Jin Myung-gil reports, there are concerns Parliament is not as prepared as it should be.
12 of 16 parliamentary standing committees got started with their audits of government offices this Tuesday. The Foreign Affairs Committee, in its questioning, urged the government to prepare thoroughly for high-level talks with North Korea that are slated to take place in the coming weeks. Regarding the possible lifting of economic sanctions that were imposed on Pyongyang after its attack on the South Korean warship Cheonan in 2010, the committee called on the government to be flexible for the sake of bettering cross-border relations. The Defense Committee focused on the possible deployment of an American anti-missile defense shield in the South to deter ballistic missile threats from North Korea. The Public Administration Committee criticized the government's botched initial response to the deadly Seoul ferry tragedy and asked whether dismantling the Korea Coast Guard and the National Emergency Management Agency was an appropriate follow-up measure. But the lack of preparation caused by the month-long political standoff has raised doubts about whether the audit will fulfill its purpose.
The parliamentary audit should not be seen as political theater. Lawmakers should refrain from scolding and humiliating witnesses.
53 government agencies are subject to inspection today, but some standing committees are already facing problems with absent witnesses and lack of cooperation from the ruling Saenuri party.
In Korea, a parliamentary audit of the government takes place every year. The ruling party usually puts more emphasis on recommending improvements to the government offices that are being audited, while the main opposition party usually focuses more on pointing out the missteps of the incumbent government. Jin Myung-gil, Arirang News.
Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics reported rather disappointing third quarter results, with its earnings falling some 60%, missing analyst estimates. And it seems the world's biggest smartphone maker is losing ground to Apple and its Chinese competitors. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Samsung Electronics posted its worst earnings in 3 years for the July to September period, and they're not expected to recover anytime soon. In a provisional report released ahead of official third quarter figures due around the end of the month, the Korean company says operating profits have likely dropped to $3.8 billion. That's a near 60% drop from the same period last year. This is also 8% lower than the estimated average of 24 local securities firms. Samsung also said it'll likely post third quarter sales of $44 billion, down more than 20% from the same period last year. Industry analysts cited falling sales in its high-end smartphones as the main factor, such as the Galaxy S5, which was released last April, and its Galaxy Note 4 phablet released last month. Eroding profits in its mobile unit has in turn affected other Samsung units that supply things like displays and processor chips. Analysts say the star performer was the chip business, which was expected to account for nearly half the third quarter profit. The rise of competitors in China is seen as the main factor behind Samsung's declining global market share. The popularity of Apple's iPhone 6 and 6 Plus are also believed to have had an impact as consumers held back to wait for the new models, which were released last month. Due to this, a pickup in the fourth quarter is unlikely, as saturation in the high-end smartphone market is further driving down unit prices of Samsung smartphones while increasing the company's marketing expenses. Samsung says it's preparing new smartphone lineups featuring new materials and innovative designs. It also developed new mid to low-end devices to help it compete in the ever-evolving market. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Korea's exports in the information, communications, and technology sector hit an 11-month high in September on the back of strong sales of display panels, computer devices, and tablet PCs. Government data shows last month's outbound shipments of ICT products standing at $15.4 billion, up 9% from a year earlier. This also means the sector recorded a trade surplus of $7.8 billion in September. In particular, exports of semiconductors hit an all-time high at nearly $6 billion. Korea's handset exports were down 5%, however, with the launch of Apple's latest iPhone 6 models and the continued rise of Chinese manufacturers like Xiaomi. And while inter-Korean relations have appeared to be easing following a surprise visit by top North Korean officials to the south over the weekend, provocations continue. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff says a North Korean patrol boat crossed south of the de facto maritime border in the West Sea this Tuesday morning. The South Korean military issued warning messages and fired off warning shots. The North Korean vessel returned fire but turned back a short time later. Incursions by North Korea south of the maritime border are far from rare. The most recent incident before today's came last month.
Now, more than 4 years ago now, a North Korean torpedo sank a South Korean warship, the Cheonan, killing 46 sailors on board that vessel. South Korea slapped a series of tough economic sanctions on the North in response, as you'd expect. In the coming weeks, the North will be looking to have them lifted when these high-level talks take place. Our Hwang Sang-hee reports on the prospects of that happening.
When officials from the North and South sit down for talks in the coming weeks, the easing of sanctions imposed by Seoul 4 years ago will be a top priority for North Korea. The sanctions, instituted in response to the North's sinking of a South Korean warship, ban nearly all inter-Korean economic activities except those within the Kaesong industrial complex. Seoul says Pyongyang must assume responsibility for its involvement in the 2010 incident.
For the May 24th sanctions to be lifted, our stance is that North Korea must first take responsible steps that can be fully accepted by the South Korean public.
Considering North Korea had been raking in $3 billion annually from cross-border trade before the sanctions, its losses amount to at least $15 billion. In that time, Pyongyang's dependence on China has increased, its trade with Beijing standing at around $6.5 billion last year. Addressing concerns that the sanctions are standing in the way of improving inter-Korean ties, President Park Geun-hye has shown some flexibility. South Korean companies are taking part in a fresh trilateral project with Russia and North Korea, building a railway running from the North Korean port of Najin to the Russian town of Hasan. But before South Korea lifts any sanctions, it will also have to take into consideration the handful of international sanctions that have been slapped on Pyongyang over the years. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Now, President Park Geun-hye is seeking to secure a better foothold in West Africa and throughout the rest of that continent. At a summit with the president of the Ivory Coast, Alassane Ouattara, in Seoul on Tuesday, President Park discussed boosting economic cooperation with the West African nation. The two leaders also exchanged views on working together in global education and culture. African diplomacy has been an important part of President Park's foreign policy. The leaders of Uganda and Mozambique were the first two world leaders to visit Korea after President Park took office early last year. Now, Nobel Prize Week has begun, with the first one being awarded in Sweden on Monday. It went to 3 scientists for uncovering something the Nobel Committee says has occupied the imaginations of philosophers and scientists for centuries. Our Park Ji-won reports.
The Norwegian husband and wife team of May-Britt Moser and Edvard Moser, together with their British-American colleague John O'Keefe, have been awarded the prestigious Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine for discovering the human brain's GPS system. The discovery of so-called grid cells that become active when trying to map and navigate the outside world explains how the brain knows where we are and is able to guide us from point A to point B.
Everyone is here to celebrate with us today. It is absolutely fantastic. What we're interested in is to register small signals, electrical signs from the brain, so that we uncover the mysteries of the brain, such as sense of place and memory.
May-Britt Moser's husband and co-researcher Edvard was told the news after getting off a flight from Germany.
Of course, I'm full of gratitude. It's a great moment.
O'Keefe explains the possible ramifications of the team's studies, including how it could ultimately help Alzheimer's patients and stroke victims.
Once we understand how an aspect of the world, in this case an aspect of the brain works, we then will start thinking about, well, what goes wrong with that part of the brain? How does it go wrong in, for example, Alzheimer's disease?
The trio of scientists will receive 8 million Swedish crowns, or some $1.1 million for broadening our understanding of the human brain's cognitive functions. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
And let's now get a check on some of the other international headlines we're following on this Tuesday afternoon. Our Eunice Kim is standing by at the news center for that.
Eunice, the Ebola virus has now reached Europe, with an infection reported in Spain.
That's right, Mark. A nurse's assistant who had treated an infected priest flown in from Sierra Leone received that diagnosis, marking a first infection outside of West Africa. This as the WHO has released new warnings on how the hemorrhagic virus can be spread. Our Shin Se-min has the details.
A Spanish nurse has become the first person to contract the Ebola virus outside West Africa in the current outbreak. Spain's health minister confirmed Monday that the woman, described as sanitary technician, had treated 2 Ebola patients in Madrid who later died. She has been transferred to a hospital in Madrid for treatment, and 30 healthcare workers who came into contact with her will remain under observation for 3 weeks. In the United States, the Obama administration is working on bolstering its defenses against Ebola.
We're also going to be working on protocols to do additional passenger screening, both at the source and here in the United States. All of these things make me confident that here in the United States, at least, the chances of an outbreak of an epidemic here are extraordinarily low.
6 people have so far been treated for Ebola in the United States. 1 American man developed symptoms a week or so after coming into contact with an infected person in Liberia. The administration says a travel ban from West Africa is not an option at the moment. Looking to raise global awareness, the World Health Organization announced Monday that although Ebola is not an airborne virus like flu, it can be passed through breast milk and urine. The WHO stressed in particular that the virus can persist in semen for at least 70 days. Ebola can also be transmitted through direct contact with the bodily fluids of an infected person, including blood, sweat, and saliva. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Formal dialogue between Hong Kong's pro-democracy activists and government officials could begin as early as this week, as the crowds of protesters that had clogged the territory's streets significantly receded. A second round of preparatory meetings were held by representatives of both sides last night. They agreed that there will be several rounds of negotiations, that both sides will be held on equal footing, with the results of the talks to be confirmed and implemented by the government. Earlier on Monday, student protesters lifted a blockade to government offices. Schools and businesses also reopened yesterday. Come evening, more than 1,000 protesters gathered in 3 locations without incident to continue their call for universal suffrage in Hong Kong's chief executive election in 2017. Islamic State fighters have infiltrated the border town of Kobani, despite the determined efforts by Kurdish forces backed by coalition airstrikes. Reports say the jihadist group took a part of Kobani's eastern district, their black flags seen planted there in addition to a hillside that overlooks the town. Eyewitnesses said IS militants were shelling surrounding neighborhoods with mortar fire. The advance has triggered 180,000 Kurdish Syrians to flee to neighboring Turkey in fear of mass beheadings and torture. IS forces have pushed for control of Kobani for almost 3 weeks now in a bid to control a swath of Syrian territory from the Turkish border to the group's self-proclaimed capital of Raqqa, 100 kilometers away. And finally, the U.S. Supreme Court has allowed the expansion of same-sex marriage in America by not ruling on appeals by 5 states seeking to uphold their bans. The justices let stand lower court rulings that had struck down gay marriage bans in Wisconsin, Indiana, Oklahoma, Utah, and Virginia. While the justices did not offer an explanation for their inaction, it is being viewed as a statement that the Supreme Court does not think it's wrong to allow same-sex couples to marry. The move would clear the way for gay marriage to be legal in 30 states, which is up from 19 plus the District of Columbia. Challenges are pending in the remaining 20 states.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at Noon with Mark Broome and Eoh Jin-joo.
I'm Eoh Jin-joo with Pro.
Market researcher, strategy analytics said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about
Japan's foreign minister says he will consider ordering the removal of a comment on his ministry website that says the wartime sexual enslavement was a clear violation of human rights and dignity of women. Speaking at Parliament on Monday, Fumio Kishida said his ministry will soon decide whether to delete it or add extra commentary to it. The statement introduces the Asian Women's Fund, which received private donations for the sex slave victims from 1995 to 2007. The minister was responding to a question by an opposition lawmaker who said he didn't believe his country forced women to serve at military brothels in the early 20th century. 9 out of every 100 Koreans, or close to 4.7 million people, are expected to receive a public pension next year. That is up more than 8% from this year, and it will be the first time the figure has surpassed the 4 million mark. The recipients include those under the nation's 4 major public pensions, including those for public servants, private school workers, and military personnel. Now, with the number of recipients rising, their expenditures are also showing a continuous rise, with the number expected to reach 35 trillion won, or $33 billion in 2015.
Now, Korea is well known around the world for its feverish appetite for English education, and Korean parents are happy to drop some big money, really, to ensure their sons and daughters get a head start at a young age. A new study shows parents with children in elementary school or younger spend more than twice as much on private English education than they do on Korean education. This, according to a survey conducted last month on more than 500 parents. It showed they spend an average of $150 a month on private English education. That's 2.3 times more than they shell out for Korean education. The respondents cited the growing importance of English in society and a lack of public English education as the reasons for their heavier spending on English classes. Now, as the market becomes ever more cutthroat, with stores seemingly opening on almost every corner in Korea these days, convenience stores are turning to novel ways to attract and, more importantly, keep customers, offering high-tech devices and rather unconventional services on top of their usual fare of soft drinks and nighttime snacks. Our Kim Min-ji reports.
Convenience stores in Korea are pushing to become more convenient than ever, evolving into so-called living stores that cater to the everyday needs of consumers. The number of convenience stores has nearly doubled from just 4 years ago. This translates into roughly 1 convenience store per 2,000 people. And it's growing to become a $12 billion industry this year. But with quantitative growth approaching its peak, convenience stores are now seeking new sources of profit by offering a new range of products and customizing stores to meet the individual needs of customers.
7-Eleven offers diverse products depending on store locations. In this store, we sell flowers and have imported a French underwear brand. We're also planning to offer more products that meet the needs of single-person households.
Non-food products now make up about 17% of 7-Eleven sales, and the plan is to boost that figure to 20% next year. GS25, another popular convenience store, is offering a lineup of tech goods from cell phones and televisions to water purifiers. And some take it to another level by offering space to enjoy a cup of coffee or hold meetings.
I didn't know these rooms existed. I hope to use one in the future with my friends when I do team assignments.
Customers can reserve these rooms at just $1 per hour, along with free Wi-Fi access, printing facilities, and laptop rentals.
We created this space with the purpose of attracting more customers by offering convenience. People visit our store not just to buy food, but to spend time.
By shifting focus from their traditional money makers like instant foods towards new goods and services, convenience stores are striving to be more than just a quick stop shop. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now, if you're lucky enough to be in Korea at the moment, you'll be well aware of just how wonderful the weather is. A great many festivals are also running over the next few days, so there really is no excuse at all not to get out there and enjoy it. Our Son Jung-in has the details about 3 festivals taking place in Korea's Gyeonggi-do province, which is on the outskirts of Seoul.
Producing a thunderous noise, the Black Eagles demonstrate their acrobatic moves, crisscrossing in perfect unison. Using the sky as a canvas on which to draw, the aerobatic team glides through the air, sketching different pictures with the white smoke from their tails. The vast sky is filled with planes shooting high into the air and plunging down again.
The most interesting maneuvers are the tumbles, where the airplane literally tumbles head over heels, and also the reverse airflow maneuvers, where the airplane goes backwards. Also, the airplane can be flown in knife-edge flight on its side for long periods of time, and of course inverted.
Also in Gyeonggi-do province, the Yeoju Ceramic Festival is in full swing this week in the city of Yeoju. The festival features many ceramic works from various artists, as well as a range of hands-on activities such as baking your own pottery creation or smashing them to relieve your stress away. And over in the nearby city of Suwon, the Suwon Hwasong Cultural Festival will get underway, inviting local and foreign visitors to Hwasong Fortress, a UNESCO World Cultural Heritage Site. Visitors can have fun while learning more about Korea's Joseon Dynasty era.
There are so many festivals taking place this week in Gyeonggi-do province. We have the air show and the Suwon festival. I hope people take some time to enjoy this splendid weather with their family and friends.
손정인, 아리랑 뉴스.
Good afternoon. The first frost of the season came this morning at the peak of the Seorak mountain in the east of the country, where the morning low has dipped below the freezing mark, and other regions also woke up to a quite chilly morning. But the skies have been fairly clear. Mostly to partly sunny skies are expected throughout the day across the nation, and the daily highs are expected to be similar or even a tad higher than yesterday. So let's take a closer look at the readings for today. Now, the daytime high in the capital and Daegu will rise to 22 and 23, while Gwangju and Busan will peak at 24 and 23 respectively. And Jeju Island and Daejeon will peak at 22 and 23 respectively, while Dokdo rises to 19. And it seems like we'll have chilly mornings till the end of the week, but the highs will be a bit milder, but we gotta be aware of big temperature difference between lows and highs and dress accordingly to avoid catching a cold. Now that's all for Korea, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
And that brings us to the end of this edition of Newsline at Noon.
And Jin-joo and I will be back at the same time on Wednesday. Until then, goodbye.